Barry, thanks for joining the CEO podcast. Thanks for joining us here on a Thursday morning.
You're most welcome, and thanks for having me.
Yeah. So Barry, we've had a number of conversations. It's always great is having some veterans of tech on our podcast. You've been the CEO of many different types of organizations. You're the CEO of Forecast now, or Forescout, sorry, not Forecast. Tell us a little bit about your journey to becoming a CEO and how you got to Forescout.
Yeah, so good question. How far back do you want me to go?
Yeah, tell us about like your career and what was
Okay.
exciting, what were some of the challenges you encountered and how you overcame those challenges. I think that's always the interesting things for audience to understand how to achieve things, but also how to overcome challenges, right?
I think my first, thought about being an entrepreneur and having my own, kind of gig or being the CEO was way back when. And believe it or not, it was in high school where, I played soccer, competitive soccer, and I needed to raise about $1,000 so I could spend 2 months playing in Germany. So I created a car washing business and I hired a bunch of people who were freshmen, and I was a senior at the time, freshmen, to work at a good pay. And I kind of had this model where I could recruit, and find people who needed their cars washed, and then I would help and kind of subcontract that out and wash cars. So I did that, and realized that I really enjoyed the moving from insight to execution and working with people that have towards a common goal, and that whole theme about team is number one, and you got to hire people you can trust with your kids, and you have to kind of have a nice mission people could get aligned with, sort of kind of came out of some of my earlier experiences. And even to this day, I go look at, whether I was at JavaSoft, and I was there the first day we put the JDK on the web, if people remember the Java Development Kit. And I remember walking through, get my first day kind of coming in, and I didn't know at the time, but it was the IT boss, and his hair was on fire. He's running out the door, and we go in, we had to stand up in the morning, so I was listening. And he spoke and said, we had our E10K crash. That's a mainframe back then, the Sun mainframe. He goes, and the boss there said, well, why did it crash? And he said, well, we had 1 million concurrent downloads, and we only spec'd it for 100 concurrent downloads. So this whole notion of, hey, if you can get caught in the right sort of technology trend, that was also key to being successful in your career and picking the right opportunities. And so, whether it was doing that with Sun Microsystems or things I did at Mercury, or, kind of coming through to even now with Forescout and cybersecurity, getting with the right trends and seeing the companies escalate and being part of that growth is really exciting for me.
Yeah, it's always interesting to hear everyone's first entrepreneurial experience, and I think for a lot of the tech CEOs and CEOs in general and founders that I know, it's they had an experience when they were very young, which validated their interest and passion. And for me, it was I had to raise money to do a Boy Scout project, right? My actual first real job though was knocking on doors selling painting jobs and actually having to convince people that a 18-year-old should be painting their house, and then I had to hire painters to paint houses and subcontract it and do all that. And you kind of learn early on, like, oh, maybe this entrepreneurship thing is kind of cool, and there's something that kind of sparks that interest, and then that spark just gets bigger and louder, and the fire gets bigger. So it's always great to kind of hear that experience, and for you as an early days thing, but it continues to grow, right? That entrepreneurial spirit just gets more and more exciting as you take on bigger and bigger opportunities, right?
Yeah.
from car washes to now security, which is, to your point,
Car
a
washing
hot
or
trend.
painting houses, right? And you
Yeah.
learn that one thing that I learned, Ben, be interested if you got the same thought, but you learn this. Do you want to be right or rich? Because you can't be both. And you got to deal with customers. And, we all know all customers aren't created equal. And some, maybe they're having a bad day and they take it out on you, right? And how you react on, hey, you want to continue to sell or show the value about whatever you're doing. And making sure that people understand where the money changes hands is super important. And sometimes you have to understand what's going on in a situation and react in a way appropriately that, the objective is to make sure that you have a happy customer and a successful customer, versus reacting in a way where, it's going to be a win-lose.
Yep. Yeah, I like that. Right. And Rich, I'm gonna steal that one. So tell us a little bit about Forescout, tell us a little bit about, the company and how it was started, and then where you are today. And like you said, it's all about catching on to the trends and finding the right company within those trends. At GIgaOm, we're covering a lot of things, but the two things that customers and users want to talk about are two things: security and AI, and I guess the combination of the two. So tell us a little bit about how you kind of seen the challenge for customers at Forescout, and where you're seeing them today, and where you see them going.
Yeah. So, I mean, Forescout's been around about a little over 20 years. So it started out, trying to find its way and, doing, it had a myriad of tries on different products. And the one product that stuck was network access control. And it took off kind of in the 2015s, 2014s, where the sort of the bring your iPhone to work started, and this whole digital transformation started. And it's like, we've got these devices that we need to figure out, do they have some sense of, a right to connect to the network? And so, because if you had a traditional PC, hey, we already kind of had that locked down, and most PCs were not mobile at the time. So any mobile device coming in, should we allow them access? And that propelled Forescout for several years to it went going public and taken off. And Forescout's customers back then, just like they are today, typically are in the global 2000, and very complicated deployments, worldwide deployments, and both on the government and also the private sector. So where that was what happened. It got bought by private equity back about 4.5 years ago, Crosspoint and Advent, and they saw the opportunity to say, hey, there's a transition happening, and that transition is where device management or network access control platform and device recognition, it's not just about the devices that we think about: PC, mobile device, iPad, phone, whatever. We're also talking about IoT and OT devices. And the thought back then is that, boy, we could have this, create a security network access control center. And we had the really interesting technology, because as it turns out, not all devices are identifiable, and not all of them can have an agent put on. And so the technology within Forescout was that it looked at the network signature and could detect devices and understand what those devices were. Because it turns out every device has a signature, and especially ones that are embedded devices, a very specific signature that gives a lot of details. So if you could read that, and then you could say, hey, here's what the device is, and here's what we could do with that device, right? Give it access, not access, patch it, or whatever, could create a really interesting opportunity. More importantly, you talked about, what are the trends or secular trends that are starting to propel our business? And we've been saying it for a long time, but this whole notion of IoT and OT converging with IT, I think it's finally here. And part of that's driven by government regulations. Like we had the Disclosure Act last January, where it said, hey, if federal government in the US said, hey, if you had a breach in your network, you're responsible to talk about what it is and what kind of devices, not only IT devices, but OT and IoT devices. And if you didn't, the CEO, COO, or CFO could be personally liable. That has really propelled a different set of routines and organizational structures in many devices, especially regulated industries. And that's also propelled us to start to talk about, well, with your Forescout platform or a Forescout platform, we can do the traditional devices, but guess what? We can also do the non-traditional devices or unmanageable devices, OT, IoT devices, in one pane of glass, and give you not only visibility, but also control. And that is starting to propel the business. You also see it in, NIST 2 and some of the things happening in Europe, same sort of, kind of motion of, the compliance. And quite frankly, in the Department of Defense and the governmental all around the world, our next, and it's public information, the next battlefield is cyber, and we see that too. So we're starting to see, hey, the many of the breaches, a lot of the breaches are on critical infrastructure, and they're IoT and OT devices. So about being the right place at the right time, and having a platform that people can use that's scalable is a good thing. It's propelling our business.
Yeah, so I think there's a bunch of things we can talk about there. I think the thing I want to talk real quick about though is it was a company that started out on devices and managing devices and finding devices. That was personal devices. Now we're in an age where there's a million, billion, bazillion devices, and you were at Wind River, right? And you saw that how that all kind of came about. Um, as you kind of think about Forescout and the journey that Forescout has taken, why did you join Forescout 4.5 years ago? What was interesting to you at that time compared to now, right? A lot changes in the 4.5 years, right? You've been a CEO of public company, private company. What was interesting about Forescout, and what was that opportunity you saw, and what was the thing that really made it exciting for you?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Ben. Not that your other questions weren't really good, but this one kind of resonated in my mind because it was really important to me because I saw something where I was at Wind River for 10 years and we did embedded operating systems. And I was there before even the word IoT was used. It was called smart
Mhm.
embedded, putting an IP
Yep.
stack on an embedded device. And then it was IoT, Internet of Things. And we saw back then at that company, we were 2,000 employees, 500 million of revenues. So not small. And in many of the planes, trains, automobiles had a lot of Wind River technology in there, whether it was military or non-military. And we saw people using a very complicated supply chain to put critical infrastructure systems in place. They could be
Mhm.
escalators in an airport. They could be elevators. They could be the landing gear on an aircraft. They could be, a drawbridge. They could be the dikes in the water system in the Netherlands. And we noticed that these systems were not built to do patch and vulnerability. And since they were smart, theoretically, people could hack them. And we were thought that, hey, this is going to be a big thing to understand which devices you had out there, what were the vulnerabilities. We didn't have the technology to do that. We just understood that those devices could be vulnerable. And given the fact that these devices would have a shelf life of 30 years, that as say the hackers got smarter or the hackers said, hey, it's a lot harder to hack kind of the traditional systems, right? A PC or whatever.
Mhm.
I'm going to go to these things. And it was a matter of time. And so that was one because I saw,
Interesting.
hey, this is going to happen. And Forescout's
Yep.
got the best technology to go do this. And it turns out, Ben, interestingly enough, that about a year into my tenure at Forescout, about a year, it was about a year ago, we have Vidary Labs that does a lot of the analysis of, kind of what are the breaches out there, where are the bad actors, all of that stuff. And we have a bunch of scientists in the Netherlands, predominantly focusing on OT and IoT type breaches and vulnerabilities, but also IT. And for the first time in the 15 years that they had been doing the labs, we found that there was an embedded operating system that was at the forefront of the most breaches. And these were not in the kinds of devices that you wanted breached. And so, that made me more excited about the opportunity. And so, here we are with, kind of going way back when and seeing the vulnerability back, I don't know, call it 14 years ago, and coming full circle to be able to say, hey, you know what? This is a problem. How do we solve it? And, I felt Forescout had the best solution to be able to solve that problem, and that, critical infrastructure was important to everybody and all around the world. So I feel, that notion was correct.
Yeah. So you saw this essentially from the beginning, right? We built the technology for what we had at the time. Time has now come to pass that we have way better technology, but the hackers and the way that the organizations are run have this as a target because, to your point, everyone is getting smarter about security, but OT and IoT is still stuck in, I don't know, 1980,
Yeah.
1990, right?
Yeah.
And that's the challenge most manufacturing companies have. That's what, many different organizations have, to be able to protect this. I think the question is, well, then if you don't own the asset, you don't control the asset. How do you secure it, right? That's the challenge with OT security. Um,
Mhm.
how do you think about that? What do you see from customers? How are we supposed to go secure everything when it's all old, when it's all unpatched, when it's in all these different places, we don't even know where it is. How do you even start to think about that? And then how do you overlay the new technology with the old technology? Or do we just need to wait for the new technology to come to fruition and the OEMs have to be pushing the newest, latest thing? Because just like with mainframe and cloud, right, we're still doing both of them. What is that transition? What's the tipping point you're seeing with customers and the OEMs who've been building these things for years?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. One, if it's technology that's 40 years old, that's not smart and really doesn't have a lot of technology in it, we're probably in much better space. The area where I feel we have challenges, where we have those 30-year-old or 20-year-old technology that was made smart, either retro or by IP stacks, like the one we had at Wind River that was just for doing design wins, not commercially available. And that IP stack shows up 10 years later. It's not even IPv6 and easily hackable, and shows up. You say, oh, these things are connected. So the good news is, and this is what excited me so much about Forescout, is that you have to take a network approach. This is our expertise. So if we could understand those devices, see them, we could shut them off, block them, put the traffic down a different segment. If we can see the traffic's coming in, that's say it's on a drawbridge control system, we can shut that off. We can alert someone through one of the integrations that we have with many of the third-party vendors to go and alert someone that can come in and say, hey, we got a problem with this. We got a myriad of ways to control it. We can actually go and say, hey, these are out of the 100,000 devices you have, here's the 10 that need a patch. That's way easier than having to go to each one and put literally a USB stick in. I mean, that's a nightmare.
That's what they're doing right now, right? That's what
customers
are doing right now. Yeah.
I mean, we had one customer, I can't tell you who the customer is, but it was a major water supply company in Europe. And they literally had 190,000 things out there. They thought, how do we upgrade them? And then which ones? And we said, well, here's your stack rank. And here's the vulnerabilities potentially for these class of devices. And they could go and say, hey, here's the 10 here, here's the 10 here. And they were in different areas in a country. So it's not simple. It's not like you can just go and say, oh, they're in one building. And so here are the ones you should go. Give them a flight plan and an activity list to go. And they could go and say, well, I'm not worried about this set, but I'm worried about these, kind of 150. I'll go patch all those. Way easier. I mean, that's a simple one. To your point about what do you do about the old stuff that you have to patch and maybe a little different. And then as we move forward, where maybe the more sophisticated devices, we can provide a set of modern business routines and security routines. We integrate with ServiceNow, so we can say, hey, these particular devices down, let's go fire a patch off, right? Integrate closely with them. So we can kind of do the old school to the more modern devices and do the gamut. And we've got the ability to have a single pane of glass so they don't have multiple things they have to install, which, as we know, IT already feels like they've got, sort of technology and vendor bloat. It's hard to manage, right?
That's right. Yeah, they don't want to add a whole nother layer that wants to control everything, right?
Yeah.
It's the last thing they want to do. Okay, so let's talk. Those are all great examples, and I think a good way to think about kind of old versus newer and then new. I guess as you kind of think about customers, like maybe give us a couple examples, if you can say the names of those companies. I know you were just at NATO. You've been traveling around the world, in the Middle East, Europe, America. You speak to a lot of customers. What are some of the interesting kind of newer edge cases that are more advanced companies they're doing, and then kind of work back from that and say, well, then there's a set of customers who are in this kind of middle stage, and then there's the customers who are just at the start of their journey. Give us kind of a perspective on that and how you see that.
Yeah. So I like to tell this one because, as a soccer player or footballer growing up, and we worked with the World Cup in Qatar, and I met with the CISO, the Ministry of Sport CISO, and she said there was one area where they didn't use Forescout on. One thing. They had it in all of the security cameras. They had it in the, I don't know if you're a soccer fan, but even on the sidelines, they had the little tent where they have the medical tent and all the devices in there, so people wouldn't mess with the devices. The one thing they didn't do was the offsides cameras. And she was saying, she goes, and this might be most important. And
Yeah.
they call
It's the most critical piece of the game
critical
sometimes.
priest.
Yeah.
I had
Yeah.
no idea, by the way, the amount of gambling associated with this too. So not only if your team loses because it's offsides, because as we know, if you're a soccer fan, it comes down to 1 or 2 points tops, right? It's not
Right.
or 2 goals. It's not like someone scoring 20 goals.
That's
And so there was one match that, and I'm not supposed to tell you what match it was, but it was a really important match near the end. And that someone went in, was turning the offsides camera on and off. And she said this was a big thing because gambling and who's going to win and all that stuff. Because we had riots in the streets. So that was one area where they just didn't think that would be something that would be critical, and they didn't do it. So they said, hey, and I met with Saudi Ministry of Sport recently, and they came and he said, we just have to make sure we get the offsides and onsides cameras done. I got the feedback from them. So, the good news is there's that kind of thing where, you think of, well, that's not important. It is important to a lot of people, right? The games, the sponsorships, all of that stuff ties into who wins and who loses. So there's that use case. There's use cases in critical infrastructure. I can't say where this one is, but it's a drawbridge. And this is kind of the old example where someone was, going in and stopping the drawbridge and turning it up and turning it down. And as we know, we had one situation in the U.S., but that didn't have anything to do with the hackers, but it had a failure. But you could have a similar situation. And, that just was an old system that they made smart. So we were able to go in there and put some software there and be able to put some control in place so that people couldn't do that. And we're not able to have access to those PLCs. So that's one. And then if you just go to, things like, I like to think about stuff that people think they do things that are, no good deed goes unpunished. Hey, I'm going to go down. I'm in California and I've got a regional airport, and people are flying, personal and private planes in and out of this place. And it's in a part of California that gets a lot of fog, and Central Park. And, they thought, hey, well, why don't I put the landing lights and stuff on some sort of timer? Because I don't like to turn them on and off. We'll put them on a timer. They go down to Home Depot, they get a timer, they connect it to the internet, and that timer's going on and off. Well, someone hacked into that timer and was turning those lights on and off, the landing lights. And when it's really foggy, I don't think people want the landing lights being turned on and off as they're starting to land. So it's things like that, to even industrial robots in air-gapped environments. And this is the thing we didn't talk about, Ben, but one of the things that we're getting a lot of traction is that in air-gapped environments where they only have access to the internet in some small windows, where we have what we call a flyaway kit. And it's really cool. It's basically this, sort of industrial box, ruggedized box that is basically a server, several blades in there, and a screen. We can roll it in. It's pre-configured into an air-gapped environment, say I'm a chemical plant. Roll it in there and go and do installation discovery within minutes and tell them where their issues are. That's typically, as you know, unheard of, because people are going in installing and you have to have the windows, and it usually takes 5 months to install. This thing is contained, and we roll in, and that thing's been great for not only that, but like the federal government in a submarine, for example, or a ship, or a chemical plant. And that one has actually been a really good model, because there's some places where you can't, there's no big enough server room in a nuclear submarine. You just go in there and it's got 4 bolts bolted. It's pretty small. It's like this big. Just put it in and it's awesome. So I think it's just kind of looking at the use cases, whether it's a military submarine or it's a offsides camera or it's a drawbridge or, whatever. I think there's a lot of use cases where customers are getting smarter about this and coming to us. And what I think the team finds really creative is a lot of these are different. So we have to use our smarts and our creativity to figure out, hey, what's the best way to go and solve their problems in their way, not our way, the old way, because we're not going to be able to send a bunch of service people into a nuclear submarine to go and do a bunch of stuff. That's just not going to work. So, hey, how do you get smart about it and do it in a way where it's a win-win? That's the right versus rich, right?
Yeah. All right. That's the name of this podcast. So, you mentioned drawbridge, you mentioned, offsides, you mentioned this kind of air-gapped environment. What are some of the challenges that you see with customers and your partners as you go about solving this? Have you ever run into something you're like, hey, like we can't actually solve this problem in a way that is feasible because it's going to cost too much money or it's going to take too much time? I mean, you mentioned the air gapped environment was a good one, but there's such complicated environments, and there's, to your point, there's so many different types of devices. Like, how does a customer even start to get to the tip of the spear, and then how do you help them prioritize based on that? Because every company is trying to sell them everything, right?
Mhm.
Every company sees all these different players, and some companies are coming at the OT thing from the network side. Some companies are coming at it from the device side. Some companies are coming at it from the patch management side. Like, how do you help a customer stitch together the kind of broader strategy to start to think about this? Because they don't want to necessarily buy a tool or a technology. They want to buy an outcome, right? So how do you help them navigate that, and where do you see customers start as you also work with partners to help them on their journey?
Yeah, the interesting thing about that question is, I think we spend quite a bit of time in some of the um, resource allocation and routines on how companies are organized, because as you said, that it's complicated in some of these environments, really complicated.
Yeah.
And you have IT organizations, you have OT organizations, and who owns what, how does it work? And so what we've been spending a lot of time on, and it's worked pretty well, is that we've had vertical approaches to these solutions. And
Hmm.
then each vertical has its own challenges. Like you have medical.
Hmm.
And I'll just
Yeah.
give you an example that we've recently, been awarded some very, very large medical deals. And one of the things that we found very helpful is birds of a feather meetings. So we'll be with one very large medical organization, HMO in California, having them talk to others on how did you go by just the routines and the process and the organizational structure to solve these problems. That's the first thing,
Yep.
right? And that's
Yep.
been really helpful. So just get people to get a vision match on there's another way of doing things. And hey, there's people who can help. And then
Hmm.
we have a bunch of partners that have been really successful implementing some of these particularly vertical solutions. I'm just stay in healthcare, for example, and they can come in and be our partners to go and co-sell, because there are a lot of different ways. I mean, do you just go replace all the infrastructure? To your point, made a good one, which is sometimes replacing the infrastructure, you could go fix it. You could go and say, I'm going to
Yeah.
replace the whole set of infrastructure. That would be hundreds of millions of dollars. Or do we apply some software routines and some integrations that could go do it? And then making sure we have a set of partners that can actually help provide those options. And that's been super successful. And then start with something, right? Sometimes done with something is better than perfect. And you go
Hmm.
along, get something done, move to the next one, put a playbook together. And that's been really successful versus trying to do a big bang where, we always laugh. Some of us internally have been around for a while. It feels a little bit by the early stages of ERP. It was like, yeah, it taken 3-4 years to roll out SAP or something in the early days, or
Hmm.
Oracle. But it's
Hmm.
really about, let's take some small steps, get some early wins. And that whole done's better than perfect. And we'll get there
Hmm.
at some point. Let's just start. And so that's the other piece. And then last but not least, I think it's also having the right people. We've
Hmm.
changed our approach in the last year to going vertical in the company. We need people
Hmm.
who look, breathe, and smell like medical, experts, or look and smell like financial services experts. They speak the language.
Hmm.
Maybe they were an SE, or not SE, but they were a IT specialist at a bank, and then they come and they can actually get a vision match so much easier. And that seems to be working really well because, as you mentioned before, this generic approach, it just doesn't work, right? It may work for a little bit, but they talk about outcomes, they talk about different buzzwords, they have operating rooms versus air-gapped environments versus, and you can go on down the line. You got to speak their language, and so that's actually really, really been helpful for us. And then last but not least, this is just a personal thing, and it goes back to the Ryder Rich piece, and maybe goes back to the car wash days, but getting the company grounded in reality where the money changes hands.
Hmm.
And I think having that empathy, spending the time, Ben, I know you spend a lot of time with, the ecosystem, right? But if you don't spend that time, it's tough to really understand what's working. And sometimes
Hmm.
things change so fast. If you're not doing that, you're lost. And I would say that the flyaway kit that we did was purely because we said, okay, we're going to go do a road show, and we're going to go ask these people what their problem is and ask them, how come you couldn't solve it? And what were they trying to do? The outcome piece. And then they went, hey, to go do a proof of value or concept, we can't spend 2 months with these small windows. You got to come and configure. We got to have it all audited. You got to install a server in our server. Whoa, if you do that, then you have all these other regulations. And they said, what if you could just do X, Y, and Z? And then just listening to them and then using our value, it really became much more of a, business outcome conversation and a use case versus what the technology was. Because at the end of the day, it didn't really matter, right? I mean, it was really about, oh, cool, you get to go do this. And I think that's been a transformation. Again, I think that's part of maturing any sort of category of software or market is, as it matures, you can't just go vertical or horizontal. You got to go vertically because of the next stage. So, I would say that's probably the tips and tricks that we did. And again, always being able to learn, because I think, I tell my team all the time, I don't want the smartest people in the room. I want the best learners. And I think that, things change so goddamn much that, we just all have to be open and know that we might be wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, I think the learning and curiosity, I think is the biggest thing we see with founders, executives, even people who do just great work, right? They want to get to the bottom of it. They want to take different approaches. They know that there's a lot of different ways to get there. Do you want to take that path, or do you just want somebody to tell you what to do, right? And I think that's the difference between solving problems and just tactically doing a problem.
That's right.
Your comment about it's never done is a good one. I talked to a founder yesterday too about this, and it was actually about OT security too. And he had founded a company, and the thing that he says, it's never done, right? It's an evolution. Like, do not try to always accomplish it. Like with ERP too. Like how many news articles do we get every day that you see an ERP project fails? Right? Like we're on our 7th ERP project or our 4th cloud project. I think we're starting to see that now with AI, right? Everyone was kicking the tires. Everyone believed in the hype, and there is a lot of hype there that is believable. But we're getting back to the starting point now, right? Now we're saying, okay, technology works. We think it can do these problems. It actually doesn't do them yet. Let's start back from beginning. Now let's ask the question, like you said, what is the business outcome, right? Because everyone was asked, hey, hey, Mr. and Mrs. CEO, hey, Mr. and Mrs. CIO, go do this because we need to be an AI company now, right? And everyone figured out pretty quickly, okay, great, we can do AI, but like, are we actually going to be an AI company? Are we going to have AI change our processes? Or are we going to start in a small place? And I think the companies that started in a small place actually are way farther along than the companies who tried to do a big bang, right? Unless you are a like brand new cloud native AI company that literally had nothing to do before, then that's a whole nother conversation. But the customers we're talking about, and even if you talk about OT security, like where do you start? You got to start somewhere super focused and show the value, so then you can get the rest of the organization along to say, now we can make this bigger, right?
Exactly.
We've seen the same thing with RPA, anything, right? It's like start in a place that will prove the business value, but I think to your point, cuts across business processes and cuts across organizations. If you do just something for IT or security, no one else is going to see it. No one is going to care, because it was just solved and it never even existed as a problem. But if you get the organization, like you said, the medical organization, let's get the medical officers, let's get compliance, let's get the researchers, let's get everyone involved and do something that will impact all of their jobs, then you're going to see a big impact, right? One of the big things we talk to customers about on AI is do like a project where you can have an executive engage across the organization, have line level leaders engage, have the people at the front lines engage, do something that cuts across HR and compliance. Like just put a policy document in there, have the AI manage the policy document, have people engage in it, put some governance, put some guardrails on it, get everyone to agree that, oh, this thing actually provide a lot of benefit. Now you can have the bigger strategic discussion, right? Both for the vendor and also the company and the CIO or the CISO that's going to be the hero here, right? And I think if you can, on the vendor side, if you can make it quick and easy for the customer, that always goes a long way, right? Because then you don't have to actually reinvent their organization, which is a challenge. Okay, well, Barry, this is great. I guess what are you excited about next with Forescout? What are you excited about with customers? Is there anything you're excited about with AI or anything else interesting? Would love to hear about it. And then we'll close this thing out.
Yeah, so there's two things. One is we're launching Forescout Cloud is coming out. So you heard it here. And that will be native in Azure. So we'll be running Microsoft, and there's a lot of really nice accoutrements with Sentinel and things that'll be out of the box, special reports and all kinds of great stuff. And we will have all of our risk and exposure management portfolio of products there ready to sell. We just did a soft launch this week, and we will do a major release next week that will help on the lightweight deployments, say like a 7-Eleven, where they have multiple franchise, and you're going to put lightweight deployment where you don't need a piece of hardware. And it also provide a set of reports. And you talked about business outcomes. We get lots of C-level people coming and saying, hey, can you show me reports? Because I got to go to an audit committee and show them, right? And, it's a simple thing, but it's important to them. So we'll have a set of, call it audit committee reporting that will show at the high level. That's done, and, customers are super jazzed about it. And then we're launching some things in and around OT. And so I'm not going to mention what they are, but I will tease that we've got some very, very cool things where we are combining some of our technologies in one pane of glass with some really killer features that customers are telling us they love. That's in beta right now. And we've launched, we did the beta, and we're about to launch our AI companion. It's called Pensari. And we learned, I guess you got to eat your own dog food. We didn't want to go launch something that we said it did a lot and no one cared. We went and worked with our customers, and what they said was like, hey, if you're rolling out a enterprise version of Forescout, like any large deployment, you can get a lot of things to go potentially look at. And we've trained Pensari, and it works on all of the information we fed over time and got collected, as well as what the customer would have to say, hey, Pensari, tell me what I should focus on today. Show me the reports that I should go collect today, and it'll learn. It doesn't do control. So it could, but we know that, to your point about you make a couple of mistakes in control, that's a problem. So we're looking at, hey, how would you do certain of the sophisticated features, and what would that look like? But it's creating reports, telling the users where to focus on, being able to ask it to do certain kinds of reports and create them is very cool, because you get tons of, your boss says, hey, I need this, this, and this. Hey, Pensari, can you create a report that does this? And it's very cool. So that's coming out. So stay tuned. And then, I'm just excited that, we've got a whole next year in front of us, and it'll be interesting to see what transpires. Hopefully, we start to move in a good direction where the interest rates keep going down and people will continue to spend. I like that. But, I'm excited about next year, and this year I think is going to end with a bang, and we'll move on to 2025.
That's great. Well, congrats on getting the new kind of environment up with cloud. I think too, getting AI done. I think, using your word right. There's a lot of other companies that have launched AI that wanted to learn with customers, right? But it wasn't right. So, congrats on getting it out there and getting it to market right. That's a huge accomplishment, and I'm sure customers will appreciate that. I think especially in security and OT, it's a different type of environment than, hey, like I just want to check my co-pilot on my Teams on a conversation. So I'm glad you guys are getting that right. But you probably have some customers like the military who are saying get it right. So that's great.
Yeah. And if you don't, here's what's going to happen, right? That kind of
thing. Exactly. So it's great to hear your kind of story from car washing to or football to car washing, back to football on the World Cup, and how you guys are helping secure the World Cup. So thank you, Barry, for joining, and it's always good to see you.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Thanks for having me.